Uh, Good morning. Round 6 report for the Wales team at the Tromsø Olympiad. Two tough matches again for the ladies and men's team. First off with the ladies, unfortunately went down 3-1 to Uzbekistan with 2 draws on boards 1 and 2 for Jane and Linda. They were all their players are over 2,000 with boards 1 and 2 over around 2,200 each. So good draws for the ladies on 1 and 2. In the men's also not so good news to report. We actually went down 3-1 there against Albania. We're a bit unlucky really. Of all the teams on with 2 wins out of 5, we were the 6th highest rank in terms of start position, and Albanians were the 2nd. So the way the tie-break system works, it's not doing us any favours at the moment in terms of the draw. Richard was doing fine against his 2600 Grandmaster opponent, but in time pressure kind of made a mistake, and unfortunately that cost us the game. Boards 2, 3 and 4 were looking very promising as well. I mean, Tim, which is a game I'm going to show you, ended up with a draw, but had a very interesting game and certainly were chances for a win there. On board 3, Francis again did well out of the opening, had a solid advantage and it was a French chances to play for a win, but slight inaccuracies in the end game, and unfortunately we lost there. And on board 4, nice draw for David Jameson against an international master rated over 2400. Exchange Rue Lopez got to an ending which looked maybe slightly better for David's opponent, but a blunder enabled him to win a pawn, although it wasn't necessarily a great pawn to win because of the pawn structure. But trying to get to move 40 to find a winning plan, David involuntarily walked into a 3-fold repetition, which his opponent very quickly claimed, and so that was drawn. But the game I'm going to show you today is Tim's game against his international master opponent, Dritan Mehmeti, who's rated 24-16. Tim's playing black, and we start off with a sort of standard e4, e5 sort of thing Tim knows very well, and we get a 2 knights defence as seen here, and we get quite a sharp opening with white now opening up in the centre with d4. This is quite a theoretical position. There's quite a lot of games being played in this line, and goes down to maybe move 15-16 before we start seeing some new moves. So let's see how this goes. So attacks the knight, counter-attacking the bishop. So we get this rather unusual pawn structure, which black is going to be slightly weak on the dark squares. So more developing, attacking the knight again. So knight retreats there. Okay, castling. Okay. So this position has been reached many times, and there's a couple of plans here for white. The most popular idea is to play something like Queen c3 and just to try and place a knight on c5, so take advantage of this weak square and just play on the dark squares. An alternative plan, which was actually played in the game, is to try and dislodge his bishops on a very nice secure square on b by playing a4. And if we assume, it's important that black is active, because long term there's weaknesses. This bishop hasn't got much scope and much opportunity, and pieces on b4 is white could in danger of setting up some kind of blockade and bind where black will have very little counterplay. So here Tim plays a very accurate move, and it's only this position with a4 has been reached once before against 2 2300 opponents, or in my database anyway. And after a4, the kind of counterintuitive move to an extent when you first see it is played by Tim, which is g5. It looks like you're weakening the king, but it's very important to undermine the white's central position, otherwise, as we were saying, he's in danger of being overrun. So we get this kind of forcing sequence with a5 takes, rook takes f4 here, and Tim played bishop takes e3. Possible is rook takes f4, because notice the bishop is pinned, but I think wisely Tim rejected this move, because I have to say rook takes f4 something like this. Now the rook is on 3. You can't move back to f8 because the bishop could come to c5. So maybe rook f7 and probably take with the pawn would make more sense. Let's have a look, overwrite that. So, and we get this position. Black is an exchange up, but with his pawn on a7, you'd have to fancy that there's very good compensation. So Tim just kept the material equality by playing bishop takes e3 check, queen takes, rook takes f4, and queen takes f4. Another line, actually, which is perhaps stronger than rook takes f4, according to the computer, is to play this very messy position here, is to play queen takes e5, and we get this very messy position. Notice the pawn on a7 is on 3, and Tim, after the game, suggested that queen b2 and something like queen c7 and something like this sort of position here, but it's very hard to assess, and his a pawn looks very, very strong, so Tim rejected this. But actually in this position the computer really likes black after e3. It's approximately close to winning, but again very hard to see these kind of things in such sharp, complicated positions. So reverting back to the game, so we've got queen f4, rook f8, queen g3, queen blocks, and we get this ending which objectively is quite equal. So Tim plays a nice move here, probably missed by his opponent, e3. The idea being that this is going to prevent the king, with the bishop coming to g4, from actually attacking this pawn, so to tie down the king and keep the knight, kind of remove the scope of the knight as well. So king f1, bishop f4, g4, c3. So now march the king towards the pawn, and king's coming towards the pawn, b4, and here e6. So now march the king towards the so all white can realistically do is repeat here. So we this sort of position, and white objectively cannot try to play for a win, but decides anyway that wants to do so. This is very risky play. So white attempts to play for more by playing knight a6. So we take some pawns, king d6, and we actually now do reach a drawn position with this repetition of the knight, or rather this position is agreed drawn here, with the knight attacking the pawn, so the king comes back, and then the knight goes back to a6. Notice that if the knight was not to go to a6, so say for instance a sort of non-move like king f1, then bishop c8 would actually trap the knight, so this would be clearly winning for black here. So it's important that the knight comes back. So let's go back to the actual game. So knight a6, and as we said, the draw was agreed in this position. However, Tim did have an opportunity, which he's aware of in the game, of playing d4 and sacrificing the pawn to get some freedom for the king, and it does actually transpire as very good for black, but very difficult to actually know for certain this line works. So instead of playing in this position, instead of playing king e5, it was possible to play let's d4 here, and the line will go something like this. There's two kind of lines. So there's two kind of lines. So there's cx d4. For instance, if we play knight here, there's this kind of position which you're infiltrating, and there's very good winning chances here. And then if we just go back to another line, so after knight b8, king d6, knight a6, d4 here, c d4, king d5. Now, two moves for black here perhaps. One idea looks like to play knight b8 to attack the pawn. So if we take this pawn here, you can take this pawn here. But there's an ingenious move here of just bishop c8, which traps the knight. So for instance, a sample variation may go something like this. So come and attack, win the knight, and this position, despite white having a few extra pawns to the piece, we can we just play it on a bit further. After king e3, we black stabilise the position, and we'll then be able to win. However, after playing such a long game, to decide whether to go for d4 is very difficult and unclear, and I suspect a lot of players would not be prepared to risk that. So Good, very good game, very interesting game as well. Perhaps some new additions to the theory in that line of the two knights. And overall draw 3-1. Hopefully today we'll be able to win against Brunei, and be able to report about that tomorrow.